The following is a true story about my Japanese grandma, my Oba-chan. So I was about 10 the year grandma moved in with us. It was around 6 months after grandpa had passed away. And thinking back, I suppose she must have felt lonely running around in her old big house. Left alone with only her grief and memories of what had been. So even though Mum protested a little, my parents actually welcomed her in. I didn't mind a bit, not one bit. Grandma was lively, full of fun, and I adored her. She always had a stash of sweets, like little Japanese candies that would sneak me a few whenever she saw me. She'd be the first to defend me whenever I got into trouble too. But it was her stories that I loved the most. Scary Japanese stories of spirits, ghosts, and ghouls. Grandma had a story for everything. Tales about growing up during World War II or about her antics on the south coast of Japan with her family. Some were sad, others funny. Some were just pure adventures. But it was the spooky ones that I loved the most. And trust me, she had plenty of those. She told me she dabbled in the occult as a teenager, some kind of Japanese version of an Ouija board. Tarot cards, fortune telling, all that sort of stuff. Most of her stories I just laugh at or laugh off or forget shortly after. But there were a couple that genuinely scared me. I was only 10 after all. And Grandma had a real talent for making those stories come to life. She'd switch off my bedroom light so only the faintest moonlight crept through the curtains. Then she'd lean in close. Close enough for me to see her wrinkles and smell the Japanese candy on her breath. Her dark, pitch black eyes would lock onto mine. Now, some of those stories probably gave me nightmares, but even years later, I remember one in particular. One in particular that stuck with me. The story of the shower. Now, one night after I'd asked her about her love of baths. In Australia, they're not so popular, but everyone in Japan loves their baths. And she told me this story. Grandma would spend ages in the tub, lighting candles, burning incense, humming and singing to herself until the water cooled down. It drove my mum nuts. When I asked her why, she told me that it was the only place she felt safe enough to relax. You know, people like your grandma who are more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths, she told me one night, shuffling closer on the futon on the floor. I could never spend that long in a shower. That'd be far too dangerous. Grandma's black eyes locked onto me, unsmiling, an air of seriousness that hopefully shouldn't be around these types of scary bedtime stories. But I knew it was time for a real one. I shivered with excitement and tucked the covers right up to my chin. I asked her, "What's so dangerous about showers, Grandma?" She turned partway, glancing out the window, then back at me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. My heartbeat just a little bit faster. "Well," she finally said, "it's only dangerous if you close your eyes, of course. If you close them for more than 10 seconds, that is." I asked her what she meant, not sure how serious she was. "Ever play red light, green light?" I nodded, and she nodded back. "That's what it's like in the shower when your eyes are closed. That's what it's like with some of the ghosts." A chill slid down my back. "What kind of ghosts, Grandma?" She'd explained to me many times about yokai, Japanese spirits that somehow take over objects, possessing people and things. She sighed like she regretted ever mentioning them to me and faced me again. When she spoke, her voice had dropped to a whisper. "No one knows exactly," she murmured quietly. "Some say they're drawn to the heat and the scent in a shower. Others think it's just some kind of demon slipping into our world through the steam. No one knows for sure, because the ones who've actually seen him, well, they don't get to tell the tale." I held my breath, slowly getting more and more terrified, and Grandma scooted a little bit closer. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You're gonna be fine. You'll be fine as long as you remember the rules." I asked her, "Grandma, what rules?" "Well, when you're in the shower, just try not to close your eyes too long. 5 seconds is fine. 10 seconds, yep, just about okay. But if you go longer, you might start to feel like something or someone else is in there too. Something watching, something a little bit too close. And trust me, if you pass 15 seconds, that is when you might start to hear a sound." "Hear a what?" I asked her. "A soft tap, tap, tap of fingers on the glass. Fingers tapping on the shower door. If you ever hear that sound, will you promise me one thing?" I asked my grandma. I said, "What, Grandma?" "Anything, Grandma." She said, "Promise me you won't open your eyes." I'm sure you can't blame me, but that night I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I imagined a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me. And when I did manage to sleep, I had nightmares. Bad nightmares. All week, in fact. Dreams of eyes watching me in the dark, and long fingers reaching out to touch my bare skin. It wasn't much better when I was awake either. Showers were the worst. That's when Grandma's story hit me the hardest. I'd never thought about it before, but now I couldn't close my eyes in there. I'd be under the spray, shampoo trickling down my face, and as soon as I shut my eyes, I'd hear Grandma's words in my head. 5 seconds is fine. 10 seconds, just about okay, but any longer, I'd scrub my hair as fast as I could. Shampoo dripping off my chin, and once I reached 5 seconds, I'd feel it. A pressure like something was there. Not exactly being watched, but something close to it. I'd hurry through my hair, trying to get rid of the suds and the reddish darkness behind my closed eyes, mixed with the roar of water in my ears. I felt like holding my breath before a scream. I'd count the seconds in my head. Sometimes I'd be so desperate to open my eyes, I'd do it before the soap was fully rinsed out, making my eye go red and sting. But before I closed them again, I'd always make sure to glance through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was alone. It wasn't long before Mum noticed something was wrong. She heard me cry out in my sleep one night and came to soothe me. When she asked what was wrong, I told her. I told her about Grandma's stories, her Japanese ghosts and ghouls. She listened with a look I recognized. A wide-eyed, tight-lipped look that usually meant I was in trouble. Only this time, she wasn't mad at me. She was mad at Grandma. So Mum and Dad's bedroom was next to mine, and if I pressed my ear to the wall, I could usually hear them talking in low whispers. But that night, after Mum made sure I wasn't scared anymore and went back to her room, her voice wasn't quiet at all. "You know what your bloody mother told him, don't you?" my mum hissed. I could just hear the low bass tone rumble of my dad's voice. She told him there's a monster that'll get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. The poor kid's been having nightmares all week. You better say something to your mother in the morning, or I will. Grandma visited my room the next night. But this time, as she perched at the foot of my bed, she didn't tell a story. She just sat, staring down at me with her sad, black eyes. The moonlight caught the lines in her face. "You know I'd never let anything bad happen to you, don't you?" she finally said. I nodded back at her. I held her hand and I said, "I know, Grandma." "You know I'd never let you get hurt." I nodded at her again. "Good. That's good." She looked away briefly out the window. "The things I tell you, they're supposed to protect you, to make you strong." She paused. "But maybe your mum's right. Maybe I went too far." She looked back at me, giving a small smile, though I could tell it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll tell you what," Grandma said. "You know what I told you about the shower, Yokai? Well, I'll make sure you're safe. I'll scare him off. He won't bother you again if he sees me." I gazed at her, watching her old, moonlit face, watching her smile. I nodded, one final time. I was the one who found my grandma. I don't know exactly when it happened, maybe a week after that talk in my room, a week after she told me I'd be safe. I woke early from a nightmare to the thumping sound. I sat up. The house was quiet around me. I couldn't hear anything from Mum and Dad's room either. But it wasn't entirely silent. Down the hall, muffled by a closed door, I could hear water running. I could hear the shower. I jumped out of bed and sprinted down the hallway, heart pounding. When I reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it, shouting, "Grandma! Grandma!" again and again. Off to my right, I could hear my parents stirring. But before they reached me, I tested the doorknob, almost out of habit. It wasn't locked. I swung the door open and a wall of steam hit me. I squinted, peering through the fog. Before Dad pushed me aside, before the chaos and shouting erupted, I saw her. Grandma was lying on the shower floor, water streaming down over her. Her black eyes bulged, one hand curled near her chest like some fallen bird, the other resting on the glass door, smudges trailing down through the steam. It was a heart attack that killed her. Dad told me that Grandma was old and it struck fast. She didn't suffer. She probably didn't even realize what was happening. It didn't seem real at first, none of it did. Until the funeral, when they let me see her one last time. I was last in line. I gazed at her face, now waxy, her mouth and eyes closed forever, and her hands crossed over her chest. I stood there quietly, memorizing the details, and then I turned and walked away. I never told anyone the full story of what I saw on that night. Maybe I didn't want to believe it myself, but the one thing I really remember, after seeing her fingers trailing down the steamy glass door of the bathroom, was the other finger marks. The ones on the outside of the door. The ones just a little bit too high, that they couldn't have been left by my grandma.